Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so I hope you enjoy.
Number 10. The Vatican Apostolic Archive. The collection inside the Vatican Apostolic Archive, previously known as the Vatican Secret Archive, is extensive. Very few people are ever allowed inside to browse its endless volumes of knowledge. And even though the Vatican is claiming to be more transparent, the truth is that there are still closed sections of the archive where no ordinary person is allowed to go. And even if you were allowed to venture throughout the entire library, you would never find what you were looking for. There is an index in the index room, but the index is handwritten in languages that only experts can decipher. Plus, many things have been intentionally forgotten. For example, Pope Alexander VI, ruler of the Vatican between 1431 and 1503, was up to some fairly nefarious stuff with the women in his close personal circle. His personal letters to these women were stored inside the archive. 124 years after his death, the letters were purposely lost. Archivist Giovanni Battista Confalioneri bound the letters into 8 separate volumes and then deliberately put them in such an obscure spot nobody found them again until the beginning of the 20th century. There's even a closed section of the archives that is said to contain particularly valuable documentation. These documents are strictly forbidden unless given permission by the prefect of the archives. That kind of permission is not something ordinary people are going to get. These documents are largely off-limits. They could contain anything from the truth of extraterrestrial life to evidence that God doesn't exist. There's just no way anyone could know all the secrets hidden here. Number 9. The Secret Books of Moses. The Old Testament, the foundation for both Christianity and Judaism, contains the 5 books of Moses. These books include Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. But much to the surprise of most people, there are 2 additional books of Moses which have been removed from the standard Hebrew Bible. These books are in fact grimoires, texts composed of magical incantations and spells. The 6th and 7th books of Moses were allegedly written by Moses himself, then passed down through the generations. But at some point, a point which probably the Vatican only knows, the books were removed. They didn't fit with the rest of the biblical narrative. And if certain books can be removed because they don't fit, that puts the legitimacy of the entire holy book up for question. The spells and incantations contained in the extra books of Moses are shocking. The work contains magic names, magic drawings, and instructions on how to do some pretty paranormal things. These secret books can supposedly help one to control the weather, other people, and potentially the dead. But how true is all of this? This is something nobody really knows. No single first version has ever been found, with the oldest copies being pamphlets from 18th century Germany. Some don't even think the books exist, while others say the original copies are stored in the Vatican's secret archives, where they will never be revealed. And now for number 8. But first, it's shout-out time. Big thank you to Anti-Tryhard and Joy B for supporting this channel. Number 8. St. Peter's Crypt. The Crypt of St. Peter, known officially as St. Peter's Necropolis, is one of the creepiest places in all of Vatican City. The necropolis goes deep under the ground to the original foundations of St. Peter's Basilica, built by Emperor Constantine in 313 AD. But the necropolis goes even deeper than that. There are chambers and tunnels which reach unimaginable depths beneath the Vatican, going down to forgotten cemeteries and mausoleums from 2,000 years ago. In Christian legend, the crypt sits on the exact site where St. Peter, Jesus' own disciple and the first pope, was buried after his crucifixion. The Vatican even has a display showing what they allege to be the real bones of the disciple. The bones were discovered during excavations, although there's never been any scientific confirmation that they belonged to Peter. His tomb, or what is at least supposed to be his tomb, is approximately 33 feet, 10 meters beneath the modern floor of the church. Nobody knows exactly what secrets are being hidden down in these dark and dusty catacombs. There are images of pagan gods on the walls, depictions of Christ, and tiny avenues moving between the niches where so many bodies have been put to rest. But the biggest controversy is definitely the bones of St. Peter. For proof, the Vatican has given a few examples. They say the Greek letters for Peter have been found inscribed inside the tomb. They also say that early Christians snuck down here and covered the walls in tributes to Peter. But why did the Vatican wait until the 1940s to confirm his bones? Scientists say there's just no way of knowing for sure who the skeleton belongs to. Number 7. The French Freemason. The Roman Catholic Church has a very strict policy on Freemasonry. What seems like it should be an archaic policy is very much still enforced. It was only recently that a parish priest at a French ski resort was stripped of all his church titles when he refused to renounce Freemasonry. Father Pascal Vissin was ordered to stop all work at the Alpine resort where he worked. It was all because of his association with the Grand Orient de France Lodge. This is a French wing of Freemasonry which is considered by the church to be anti-Christian. It's even been condemned by popes throughout history. Rome itself commanded the priest to stop all functions as punishment for his association with the Freemasons. The drama unfolded in 2013, nearly a decade since the priest had held his position. He had been the parish priest in Megève since 2004, and while many have blasted the Freemasons for being part of the Illuminati, they deny it fervently. Freemasonry claims to be nothing but a gentleman's club primarily interested in charitable giving, yet the Roman Catholic Church sees them as entirely evil. Maybe the Vatican knows something the rest of us don't. What do you think? Number 6. From Witch to Saint. In 1920, Joan of Arc was canonized as a saint by Pope Benedict XV. She had already reached mythical status, inspiring the French people for centuries. But it took hundreds of years before she became a saint. 11 years after she was blessed in the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, where a statue of the young girl still stands today. The canonization of Joan of Arc is yet another in a long list of historical hypocrisies on behalf of the Roman Catholic Church. Because on May 30th, 1431, the church burned the 19-year-old alive at the stake. She was marched to the old marketplace of Rouen and killed. This was after Joan of Arc helped save France, only to be betrayed by the church. She was charged with witchcraft, heresy, and sentenced to die for dressing like a man. Even the French king separated themselves from the girl while she was in captivity for over a year because she was bad press. Joan of Arc finally signed a confession that she was a witch. Then the church mercilessly executed her. They didn't change their mind about Joan of Arc until 20 years later when they finally gave her a new trial and cleared her name. But she wasn't truly forgiven until she became a saint 500 years later. Number 5. Saint Bernard and the Virgin Mary. There are artworks that can be found all throughout Europe inspired by a very weird Christian story. It's a strange story the Vatican would rather it never be told again. The story takes us back to the 12th century and involves a monk by the name of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. This monk had an unusual connection to the Virgin Mary. What we know from historical records is that Saint Bernard was born in 1090 and advocated for the Second Crusade. He was a firm believer in Muslims being the children of Satan, not something entirely unheard of for the time. But his most famous story is something called the Lactation of Saint Bernard. Legend says that when he challenged the Virgin Mary to show herself as a true mother of Christ, her statue came to life and she squirted Saint Bernard in his eyes with her milk. There are a few alternative legends, but they're all pretty much the same. Another story says he had an eye infection and that the Virgin Mary's milk squirted in his eyes cured him. The craziest part is what came after. The story of Saint Bernard and the Virgin Mary became perversely popular throughout Europe. Artwork depicting the scene can be found everywhere, especially in Germany and the Netherlands in the 15th century. Have you heard this story before? Number 4. God's Banker. Roberto Calvi was given the nickname God's Banker because of his close connection to the Pope. He was the chairman of one of Italy's biggest banks, Banco Ambrosiano, which fell apart in 1982. At the same time the bank collapsed in a huge political scandal, Roberto Calvi died. He was found dead in London in June of that year, confirmed to be murdered by a pair of coroner's inquiries and a private investigation. At a trial in 2007, the 5 main suspects were acquitted of the murder. To this day, we still have no idea who killed Roberto. All we know is that popular theories have him mixed up with the Vatican Bank and the Italian Mafia. One of the most shocking theories is that the Vatican had him killed with help from the Mafia. Considering these are 2 of the biggest organizations in Italy, it would come as no surprise if they've had clandestine dealings in the past. It's believed Roberto was involved in illegal financial transactions inside the Vatican Bank. To prevent him from revealing secret financial dealings, the Vatican hired a hitman to silence him forever. Number 3. The Vatican Elephant. In 1962, Italian workers were busy modernizing Vatican City. They were trying to create a new cooling and heating system to keep all the priests and bishops of the Vatican cozy. And then they found something shocking. The workers uncovered 4 huge bones and a massive tooth. These bones were so big the workers thought they belonged to a dinosaur. But these weren't fossilized dinosaur bones. They came from an animal that died much more recently. They were elephant bones, stashed underneath the Vatican City. The bones were taken to the Vatican Library, analyzed by researchers, and the skeleton was named Hanno. But despite how weird the discovery was, no one cared too much about it. It was only around the 1990s that people got curious about the elephant at the Vatican. Silvio Bedini, with the Smithsonian, finally uncovered the true story shortly later. After Pope Leo X was elected in 1513, a Portuguese ambassador brought the elephant to the Vatican as a gift. It was unusual because it was an albino, pure white. The elephant was about 4 years old when it arrived in Rome. At that time, Romans didn't know much about elephants. They may have heard about them from stories used by their ancestors in great wars 1,000 years ago, but most ordinary people had never seen an elephant before. The elephant became a huge hit, a kind of elephant for the people. Sadly, the creature died in 1516. His death came when Vatican doctors started feeding the elephant gold dust to try and cure his constipation. After the death of the Vatican's beloved elephant, it was buried beneath the courtyard and forgotten about. Number 2. The Fascist Pope. The Pope is generally considered to be a benevolent figure. He's the spiritual leader of millions of Catholics across the globe. But throughout history, there have been some very bad popes. For example, Pope Pius XI was almost certainly a fascist and perhaps a Nazi. Pope Pius became the head of the Catholic Church in 1922. 1 year later, he had a secret meeting with Benito Mussolini, the leader of fascist Italy. The pair opened a secret personal channel so that they could easily communicate. Mussolini knew that his fascist regime would never succeed without at least the silent support of the Church. Vatican City was recognized as an autonomous region inside Rome. The Pope was a king in his own right, allowed to do whatever he wanted inside the Vatican. Then, when Mussolini imposed a dictatorship in 1925, power was destabilized and the dynamic was disrupted. Even in the face of extreme fascism, the Pope showed support for Mussolini, and he continued to show his support up until 1935, when Italy invaded Abyssinia. This was World War II, and things were getting serious. The Pope desperately needed to keep control over his church, and to do that he needed to keep Italy's support. The biggest fear for the Vatican was that if Germany and Italy won the war, they would turn on the church and destroy it. And so the church kept largely quiet, even during the Holocaust. But once it became clear just how horrible the Nazis were, Pope Pius XI allegedly prepared to say something about it. The day before his speech, he died abruptly. A very big coincidence. The new Pope, Pope Pius XII, took over immediately. He then made a concentrated effort to repair relations with Nazi Germany. It really makes you wonder if the Pope is even the one in charge of the Vatican. Number 1. The Jar of Manna. When the Israelites fled Egypt, they wandered the desert for 40 years. During their wanderings in the sandy wasteland, God gave them a substance that they could eat for nourishment. The Hebrew Bible calls it manna, describing this strange substance twice. In the book of Exodus, manna is described as a flaky thing kind of like frost on the ground. And in the book of Numbers, manna is described as arriving with the dew during the night. It was collected early in the morning by the Israelites and consumed. They didn't need anything else to stay alive. When all was said and done, and the Israelites found their way out of the desert, God, according to the Bible, wanted to save some manna. He wanted his miracle to be remembered by the descendants of the Israelites. So Moses told his brother Aaron to fill a jar with some manna to keep forever. The jar of manna was then placed inside the Ark of the Covenant. It was put inside the box along with the tablets of the 10 Commandments and Aaron's rod. Where is the jar of manna now? That is a subject of major debate. It should still be locked in the Ark of the Covenant, but nobody knows where that is. Some say it could be stashed somewhere in the Vatican, others say Ethiopia, and some have even suggested it's still buried in Jerusalem. Who do you think was the worst pope in Vatican history? Let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you for watching. Remember to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and come back soon for more amazing videos from the channel.